Using smarter strategies in Valorant can make you more adaptable towards any situation and outplay your enemies so that you climb one rank after the next. In order to make you prepared for every situation, we have compiled 9 tips in Valorant that you should start implementing right away. Now, speaking of right away, that subscribe button is dying to get smashed right now. I mean, it just needs to be absolutely destroyed, and you're the man for the job, so do us all a favor and smash that subscribe button. But enough talking, let's just jump right into it, shall we? Now, the first big tip that I got for you today is buying 2 guns. Now, there's some interesting things that you can do due to the despawn mechanic in Valorant. In order for you to better understand this, let's talk about some scenarios that you've probably experienced in your games. Have you ever rocked the shorty, for example, and the enemies never close in the gap and they instead push an entirely different point? And then now all of a sudden you have a shorty trying to retake and it is impossible and you are dying for your classic pistol back. Well, what you can actually do is buy the shorty or any other starting weapon you want and then drop it on the ground near your starting position. And the reason that you do that is because as long as you are holding the classic, the other weapon won't despawn. But if you're holding your weapon and your classic's on the ground, the classic will despawn. For some reason, only the classic pistol despawns. Now, make sure that no one's nearby because they're just gonna yoink your shorty right up. But you get the gist of this idea. You can still have your shorty, but your classic will always be there in case you need to grab it because enemies are rotating or fighting at longer effective ranges, or you just don't think that the shorty is gonna work in your next given engagement. Now, the next thing that you can also do when buying 2 guns is on full buy rounds. Let's say it's the last round and you're stacked with money for whatever reason, or you just have a little bit of money left over, you should almost always buy 2 guns, buy a secondary gun with your remaining money. Now, let me give you an example of this. Let's say that you have enough money to buy a Phantom and an Operator, or maybe not enough, maybe a Phantom and a Marshal. What you can do though is you can have the Sniper and peek a long angle and try to get some damage or picks, and if that doesn't work out, you can always quickly drop it and pick up your Assault Rifle for the closer range engagements. This is a way that you effectively use all your money, and you should almost never have a round where the next round you're going to be wiped on money. Always utilize every single dollar in some capacity, whether it's buying alternate weapons, whether it's buying a secondary weapon like we said with the Marshal Operator, or so on and so on. Make sure that every single dime is used to give you a slight competitive edge. Now, the next thing is a pretty simple tip, but it's just to go into teleporters backwards. Now, there's almost no downside into not going into teleporters backwards, because here's the thing: unless the teleporter is open, which it shouldn't be if you're just going in alone, you're going in blind, there should not be an open teleporter, and enemies are not gonna camp you facing the exit of the teleporter. They're gonna camp behind because it's a really easy lineup shot for you, and if you're just rushing in, they're gonna kill you so easily. So what you should start incorporating, especially if you have some sort of indication that enemies have gone through teleporters at some point in the game, go through a teleport backwards and it will line you up perfectly for someone hiding at the back of the teleporter. And even if they are off to the side, you'll be able to see them and flick to them, and they will not be expecting you to be able to do this. So definitely incorporate this into your games. It has very little downside and it could have a lot of upside because you don't know just how long an enemy is going to be camping in a teleporter, because they could be camping there for an extremely long period of time, even if you think they rotated off. Now, my last additional tip to this is if you go into a teleporter backwards and you kill someone that is in a teleporter camping, make sure to type sit in all chat, because that will tilt them into oblivion, and they deserve it because they're camping you in the teleporter. Now, let's talk about tip number 3, and this is using abilities to get teammates out of a bad situation. Let's say your teammate is stuck in cubby and multiple enemies are pushing near a site and he doesn't want to be there. You can use a lot of different abilities to secure him an exit. Smokes, boombot, even flashes, sometimes even ultimates, or you could just be aggressive and take all the aggro by firing and creating pressure. What you're essentially doing is either forcing enemies away, blocking off enemy information, or taking on the aggro yourself so that your ally can better position himself, because there's a lot of times where an ally is holding a cubby and the enemies are systematically checking one angle, checking another angle, checking another angle, angle, and he knows that he is gonna get swung on very soon. But if he runs out, he's dying anyway. So this is a way to actually turn your abilities or even just your play style into a numbers advantage, really, because your teammates would have died otherwise. So this is a really powerful strat. So if a teammate says something like, hey, smoke me out, or hey, can you help me out of here, this is exactly what you want to do. Now the next tip on the list is responding abilities with abilities. And let me explain this concept. So let's say you're Sage, right? And you hear people walking up choke, and for this example, let's talk about bind on defense A side. Now what a lot of Sages do, and you might do it yourself, is they will instantly wall when they hear enemies start walking up because they don't want enemies to push. This is the biggest mistake if you have someone that holds the heaven angle, especially if they have something like an operator, for example. Because let's say you have an operator in heaven and he's guarding that A main on that bind site. Now, the fact that you have an operator there means that enemies cannot push into sight until they contest him in some way. Now, there's really only two ways that they're going to be able to contest him. They're going to be able to smoke him off, or they're going to try to counter snipe him. Now, if they counter snipe, they're not rushing yet, so that gives you an indication. And of course, your defensive operator has an advantage. And if they smoke off him, then they have invested an ability to get him out of the area, to get him out of that powerful angle. Then after a sideline is blocked, it's their idea that they can just push under point because now they can't get opt and the opera has to rotate. Well, that's exactly the moment that you want to wall, or you want to slow, or you want to invest abilities, because then you're trading one ability for the next. This is incredibly important because then your slow barrier will last as long as possible into the smoke's life cycle, and you effectively traded your abilities on defense for their abilities to engage on attack. You see, it's ultimately a battle of efficiency. How efficient can they use their smokes to trade for your abilities? If you use wall too early, for example, they could just break it, bait out slows, and then when you have no stall at all, they could smoke your heaven opera off and push onto points, and there's nothing you could do about it, and you have no opera to protect you or trade out with kills. Now, inversely, if they ever run out of smokes and you can still have an opera heaven, then they will have a very difficult time pushing that site because they won't be able to effectively smoke them off, because every time they smoke them off, you slow them down. Every time they smoke them off again, you slow them down. It's a rinse and repeat, and if you can learn to become more efficient with your abilities, instead of just using it right off the bat, but use it in response to them investing abilities, especially on defense, that is the way that you really lock them down and use the inherent advantage of defense. Now we're going to the next tip we have for you. This is called sniper post up, or one person holds, one person pushes. Essentially what this is let's say you have an operator player. They can hold an angle and stay holding an angle. Then either as a team or even a single player, you can push up and secure space, either checking an alternate angle or making a play on the enemy. For example, let's talk about split for this example. And you have an opera playing in vents on mid in defense, and he's holding the right angle that enemies can often peek from. Then, as he holds that angle, you have an ally push up and check sewer. Now, what happens a lot is if you try to push up and check sewer, you could get swung from both angles, and if you kill the person in sewer, you're gonna get instantly pushed from that right angle. You're gonna get instantly swung on. But because you have a permanently posted op player, he can actually protect you from the swing, which is very powerful. Now, you might be asking, though, what happens if they smoke off the op player? Well, what you want to do is you actually want to be spraying and secure the person's exit, because if they use smokes, that's actually a good trade for you, especially if you could secure with fire your enemy's exit, because you really know where they're going to be peeking from. You can spam fire it, and often you can protect his exit. Now, this gets far better with precise communication, and it's a strategy that can be used in a lot of different scenarios, but it can be even a more powerful strategy in scrims, and it's a very powerful strategy that they've been using in pro play, but that doesn't mean you can't incorporate it into your games as well. Now, the next tip is a pretty simple one, but it might be one of the most important ones on this list, and it's always pinging the spike when dead. It's a very easy tip, but it's incredibly important. Enemies will often smoke off a spike, and it's easy to lose track of it, whether or not you're just trying to see it through a smoke or you're trying to wall bang it because the spike's on the other side of a wall bangable surface. You should be pinging it. When dead, a single ping goes a long way in helping teammates gain more information for the clutch up, which is what everyone wants, so make sure that you ping the spike when dead. Now, the next concept we have to talk about is holding angles. Well, there's two different ways to hold an angle, and it's either close up or further away. Now, if you think enemies are gonna fast peek an angle, they're trying to swing an angle, swing out, you do not want to be holding an angle close. You want to be holding an angle from as long as it's in the effective range of your weapon, because enemies swinging fast will be a lot easier to kill if you're really far away, especially if you're far away from the peek angle, and on your screen, they're not really going to be moving that far, even if they fast swing that angle. That being said, if an enemy is going really slow and they're slow walking, trying to be sneaky, you could hold an angle closer because it's very easy to line up a headshot if you're slightly further away from the pivot point but still really close to them, because they're just going to be walking right into you, and that's going to be a really easy kill. Now, you don't want to give them any information about where you are when you're holding close, because then they're going to not slow peek the angle, which means you're probably just going to get murdered, because I'm sure you've experienced this before where you held a close angle and an enemy swung to kill you very fast and almost insta-killed you before you seemingly had a chance to react. Also, swings for those angles will feel impossible to flick because of how far they move across your screen, as relative to where if you were really far away, it wouldn't look anywhere near as far. So the shots are going to be easier if you're further away, if they're fast peeking, but you could still get some kills. If you know where an enemy is and they're trying to sneak rotate or something like that, and they don't know where you are, then holding a closer angle can be powerful as well. Now, moving on to the 8th tip, stop spraying through smokes unless, and the only unless is silenced weapons, of course, because silenced weapons are the only weapons that leave no visual indicator of your position. That also means that if you have a silenced weapon, it is your job to put pressure on enemies and prevent them from pushing through their own smokes, not your Vandal player. So definitely keep that in mind. That's your responsibility as a Phantom player or even a Spectre player. Now, conversely, if enemies are firing through smokes with a non-silenced weapon, it is extremely easy to see where the fire is coming from and return fire with your silenced weapon, securing damage and even a kill. This is an incredibly underrated strat, but you pretty much can just constantly spray through smokes with your silenced weapon. Now, moving on to the last big topic for the video, this is about rotations, and this is because players rotate far too soon most of the time. If enemies are in default of one side, this is not the go-ahead to rotate. Rotating should only be attempted when enemies make contact with some of the power angles on a separate point, hopefully through resistance. Like, let's say we're talking about bind again and you're on defense. If enemies are in default, that does not mean rotate, but if enemies actually control part of heaven, or they took control of heaven, that is a sign for immediate rotation. Do you see the difference? That is a powerful angle that they have, which makes it a lot easier for them to secure sight, which means they're far more likely to do so. So understanding what the signs are is a really big important part about when to rotate. Don't just see them in default and just rotate, because if you always rotate when people just put pressure default, then they can just drag you around your whole team like a rabid dog, where you just go, oh, they're in default here, let's go here. Oh, they're in default here, let's go here. That is not the go-ahead to rotate. Now, there is a tactic that you can use that pro players incorporate, which is called the trickle rotate. This is where if it becomes far more likely that enemies are not rotating, you send one player one by one to the next site. The trick is to leave your best staller on the site remaining, because if the enemy team do rotate, then your team can also fast rotate while you delay them with your remaining abilities. You could also do a strategy like send some people to lurk and some people to cut off the rotation. There's a lot of different ways to kind of compromise, instead of your team, all of you just automatically going back through your spawn, giving up your powerful angles and your powerful defensive positioning. So definitely keep that in mind. Anyways, if you learned anything in this video, or if you were entertained, smash that subscribe button and definitely let us know what you want to see. What type of guides do you want to see on the channel? I'm very interested, so definitely let me know in the comments down below. But I think that's all we got for you today. Thanks for coming by. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.